women among the rejects who had been specialists in various fields. There were a few books that had survived the trampling of the unicorns, and others could be written, with ink made from the black lance tree bark, upon parchment made from the thin inner skin of unicorn hides. The knowledge contained in the books and the learning of the rejects still living should be preserved for the future generations. With the help of that learning, perhaps they really could, some day, somehow, escape from their prison and make Athena their own. He told West of what he had been thinking. "We'll have to start a school," he said. "This winter. Tomorrow." West nodded in agreement. "And the writing should be commenced as soon as possible. Some of the textbooks will require more time to write than Ragnarok will give the authors." A school for the children was started the next day, and the writing of the books began. The parchment books would serve two purposes. One would be to teach the future generations things that could not only help them survive, but would help them create a culture of their own as advanced as the harsh environment and scanty resources of Ragnarok permitted. The other would be to warn them of the danger of a return of the Gurns, and to teach them all that was known about Gurns and their weapons. Lake's main contribution would be a lengthy book, Terran Spaceships, Types and Operation. He postponed its writing, however, to first produce a much smaller book, but one that might well be more important, Interior Features of a Gurn Cruiser. Terran intelligence knew a little about Gurn cruisers, and as second-in-command of the Constellation he had seen and studied a copy of that report. He had an excellent memory for such things, almost photographic, and he wrote the text and drew a multitude of sketches. He shook his head ruefully at the result. The text was good, but for clarity, the accompanying illustration should be accurate and in perspective, and he was definitely not an artist. He discovered that Craig could take a pen in his scarred, powerful hand and draw with the neat precision of a professional artist. He turned the sketches over to him, together with the mass of specifications. Since it might some day be of such vital importance, he would make 4 copies of it. The text was given to a teenage girl, who would make 3 more copies of it. 4 days later, Schroeder handed Lake a text with some rough sketches. The title was Operation of Gurn Blasters. Not even intelligence had ever been able to examine a Gurn hand blaster. But a man named Schrader, on Venus, had killed a Gurn with his own blaster, and then disappeared with both infuriated Gurns and Gurn-intimidated Venusian police in pursuit. There had been a high reward for his capture. He looked it over and said, "I was counting on you giving us this." Only the barest trace of surprise showed on Schroeder's face, but his eyes were intently watching Lake. "So, you knew all the time who I was?" "I knew." "Did anyone else on the Constellation know?" "You were recognized by one of the ship's officers. You would have been tried in 2 more days." "I see," Schroeder said. "And since I was guilty and couldn't be returned to Earth or Venus, I'd have been executed on the Constellation." He smiled sardonically. "And you, as second-in-command, would have been my execution's master of ceremonies." Lake put the parchment sheets back together in their proper order. "Sometimes," he said, "a ship's officer has to do things that are contrary to all his own wishes." Schroeder drew a deep breath, his face somber with the memories he had kept to himself. "It was 2 years ago, when the Gurns were still talking friendship to the Earth government, while they shoved the colonists around on Venus. This Gurn, there was a girl there, and he thought he could do what he wanted to her because he was a mighty Gurn, and she was nothing. He did. That's why I killed him. I had to kill 2 Venusian police to get away. That's where I put the rope around my neck." "It's not what we did, but what we do that we'll live or die by on Ragnarok," Lake said. He handed Schroeder the sheets of parchment. "Tell Craig to make at least 4 copies of this. Someday, our knowledge of Gurn blasters may be something else we'll live or die by." The school and writing were interrupted by the spring hunting. Craig made his journey to the plateau's snow-capped mountain, but he was unable to keep his promise to prospect it. The plateau was perhaps 10,000 feet in elevation, and the mountain rose another 10,000 feet above the plateau. No human could climb such a mountain in a 1.5 gravity. "I tried," he told Lake wearily when he came back. "Damn it, I never tried harder at anything in my life. It was just too much for me. Maybe some of the young ones will be better adapted and can do it when they grow up." Craig brought back several sheets of unusually transparent mica, each sheet a foot in diameter, and a dozen large water-clear quartz crystals. "Float from higher up on the mountain," he said. "The mica and crystals are in place up there, if we could only reach them. Other minerals, too. I panned traces in the canyon bottoms. But no iron." Lake examined the sheets of mica. "We could make windows for the outer caves of these," he said. "Have them double thickness with a wide air space between for insulation. As for the quartz crystals—" "Optical instruments," Craig said. "Binoculars, microscopes. It would take us a long time to learn how to make glass as clear and flawless as those crystals. But we have no way of cutting and grinding them." Craig went to the east that fall, and to the west the next spring. He returned from the trip to the west with a twisted knee that would never let him go prospecting again. "It will take years to find the metals we need," he said. "The indications are that we never will, but I wanted to keep on trying. Now my damned knee has me chained to these caves." He reconciled himself to his lameness and confinement as best he could, and finished his textbook, Geology and Mineral Identification. He also taught a geology class during the winters. It was in the winter of the year 4 on Ragnarok that a 9-year-old boy entered his class, the silent, scar-faced Billy Humboldt. He was by far the youngest of Craig's students, and the most attentive. Lake was present one day when Craig asked, curiously, "It's not often a boy your age is so interested in mineralogy and geology, Billy. Is there something more than just interest?" "I have to learn all about minerals," Billy said with a matter-of-fact seriousness, "so that when I'm grown I can find the metals for us to make a ship." "And then?" Craig asked. "And then we'd go to Athena, to kill the Gurns who caused my mother to die, and my grandfather, and Julia, and all the others, and to free my father and the other slaves, if they're still alive." "I see," Craig said. He did not smile. His face was shadowed and old as he looked at the boy and beyond him, seeing again, perhaps, the frail blonde girl and the 2 children that the first, quick, violent months had taken from him. "I hope you succeed," he said. "I wish I was young so I could dream of the same thing. But I'm not. So let's get back to the identification of the ores that will be needed to make a ship to go to Athena, and to make blasters to kill Gurns after you get there." Lake had a corral built early the following spring, with camouflaged wings, to trap some of the wood goats when they came. It would be an immense forward step toward conquering their new environment if they could domesticate the goats and have goat herds near the caves all through the year. Gathering enough grass to last a herd of goats through the winter would be a problem, but first, before they worried about that, they would have to see if the goats could survive the summer and winter extremes of heat and cold. They trapped 10 goats that spring. They built them brush sunshades. Before summer was over, the winds would have stripped the trees of most of their dry brown leaves, and a stream of water was diverted through the corral. It was all work in vain. The goats died from the heat in early summer, together with the young that had been born. When fall came, they trapped 6 more goats. They built them shelters that would be as